March 24th, 2026. This meeting will now come to order at 7 p.m. My name is Nate Andrews, Chair of the DRB. Please silence your phones and devices. For Zoom technical questions, contact planning staff through Zoom chat. I'll begin by taking a roll call of DRB members in attendance this evening. Chair is present. Scott Riley. Jim Brzolera.
Present.
Brian Curtis.
Present.
Matt Fraser.
Present.
We do have enough for a quorum this evening. The following items are on the agenda for tonight's public hearing. DP 26-02.1, Blair Knowles and Matt Parisi at 7997 Williston Road in the Village Zoning District. Our next agenda item will be growth management. This is only a status update for the board. There will not be any allocation hearings. And with that, I would like to open this up to a public forum. Does any member of the public, either in present or on Zoom, have any questions or comments for the board that do not relate to agenda items tonight? Not hearing or seeing anything, or?
I think the attendee online is for the agenda item.
Got it, thank you. With that, I will open public hearing DP 26.02.1, 7997 Williston Road. I believe the applicant is on Zoom. Could you please identify yourself by your name and address for the record?
Yes, my name is Matthew Parisi, and the address is 7997 Williston Road, Williston, Vermont.
Thank you, Matt. I understand, Matt, that you may be requesting a continuance this evening?
Yes, that is correct. I am going to request a continuance. There's been a lot of mitigating circumstances regarding this application, and knowing now what date the actual select board hearing regarding certain road requirements are going to be, we would prefer to continue this meeting until after that select board hearing, which is currently scheduled for April 7th, I believe.
Okay. And Matt, is there a certain amount of time that you'd like? Is there a date that you have in mind? I believe our next meeting is April 14th after that, but if you'd like to use this time to communicate with...
Yeah, that's great. Emily, I don't know if you can speak to this when the actual those decisions come out, because we're going to make our case at that select board hearing, and I just don't know how long it is until essentially our request will either be approved or denied.
Yeah, so good question. The select board is holding a public hearing on bylaw amendments on Tuesday, April 7th. If they decide to amend any component of that bylaw amendment, there would be a process after that where it would have to circulate back by the planning commission. The select board hearing would need to be warned for another 15 days. So it might not be until early May that they make a final decision on that package of bylaw amendments if they would want a change. Certainly we would hope on April 7th, if they wanted a change, they would indicate that so that staff goes through the process for a reason. But it wouldn't be until early May that if they've decided to change it on April 7th for it to work through that process. So after April 7th, the DRB hearings would be April 14th or April 28th. I would hope by then we would have direction on where the select board would want to go on a change, but sometimes it takes them a little while to decide if they want to go forward with the bylaw as is or see what the tweaks might be before they decide to vote on it. And you can always continue it again.
Okay, yeah, so I just, so I guess at this point, I think a safe scenario would be the second meeting then, the 28th, would that?
Sounds good. And if we need to continue again?
Just continue again.
Perfect.
Yep.
All right.
So April 28th.
Yep. All right, thank you, Matt. Well, with that, this hearing, DP 26.02.1, is being continued to April 28th. Please check back for the town website or contact town staff to confirm that date, as it may change. And with that, I am going to close DP 26.02.1 at 7:04 p.m. Members of the public who are interested to hear the next agenda item are welcome to stay. It is growth management. It will be a staff report. You're welcome to stay or leave. Up to you guys. Thank you. Going to open this up now to staff. Agenda item 3, 2026 growth management updates for the board.
Yeah, so the current version of the bylaw was adopted in 2008. And this is the first time in the life of that bylaw that we've not had public hearing items to consider. So for new DRB members, you will never know what it was like to have many growth management hearing items. And I'm envious of you, as I'm sure Scott is. So growth management, through one form or another, started in the early 1990s in Williston as a way to modulate the rate and pace of residential growth. In the early 2000s and early 2010s, and people still talk about this, it was a very competitive system where a small rural subdivision might be denied allocation, a medium-sized subdivision might have to return over several years to get all of its allocation to construct all of the homes it would need to build. And it would be a very lengthy process to get a subdivision through all of its permitting, even if at the very beginning you knew how many units were going to be in the overall development. There were 2 projects that were eligible this year, and they are choosing to go through different permitting routes, the inclusionary zoning route, whereby they don't need allocation, and the other project that just got continued is now below the threshold of needing to go through growth management or inclusionary zoning. So because we're trying to do some more board trainings, using tonight to kind of talk through what growth management is and what those recent changes were over the years. So the map of Williston, the areas in blue are the industrial zoning districts, so think up off of Redmond Road near CSWD, Industrial West, off of Williston Road, Shunpike Road, Krupp Drive, that area. There's no residential allowed in those parts of town. There are legacy residential homes in those areas. The vast majority of town, shown in green, is the agricultural rural district. The vast majority, like 99% of this area, is outside the sewer service area. So everything is served by an on-site septic system. The area in yellow is the village zoning district and the residential zoning district, where growth management has been very competitive over the years. And then the area in red, and the red hatching in the middle, is the Taft Corners Form-Based Code District, things within the growth center where we primarily see apartment buildings with 30 to 60 units in a single building. So over the years, the permit process for projects has been stratified to be based on not only its location, but its the type of units. So if you're in the form-based code zoning district, everything you do there except subdividing a lot is administrative. So the design review, the growth management allocation for a 30 or 40 unit apartment building, all of that in Taft Corners form-based code is an administrative process. Outside of form-based code, if you're 4 or fewer units, you go through pre-app and growth management, and there are some administrative caveats there that I'll get into. If you're 5 to 9 units, you're either providing one home affordable at 100% the area median income, or you're a market rate project and you're going through growth management. So 5 to 9 units, if you're a market rate project, your permit track is similar to how it used to be under the old growth management rules, where you go through pre-application, growth management in March of a calendar year, and then you can file your discretionary permit. 10 or more units, This is where the options are either to do inclusionary zoning, where your percentage of affordable units is based on the overall project count. And if you're 10 or more units and you're a market rate project, not only do you go through growth management, but you're subject to payment in lieu, which is not an impact fee, but it's similar, where it's several $1,000s calculated on a per unit basis. Our bylaw provides some additional flexibility for existing non-residential buildings. Hotels and motels are still treated the same way as constructing new dwelling units, but we made it easier to convert a non-residential building into housing. So a lot of these significant growth management regulation changes started in 2022 when form-based code was adopted and allocation was allowed to be granted administratively. In October 2023, inclusionary zoning was added as an alternative to growth management. So basically creating that two-track system of you're either a market rate project and you're exempt from growth management, or you go through growth management, or you provide some number of affordable units. And then further clarifications were added in 2024 and April 2025. April 2025 was a response to state law changes, and that's where a project can do some things administratively. So if you're on an existing lot on a septic system, you can do a duplex administratively, the same way you can do a single family home administratively. If you're in a water sewer area, you can do up to a fourplex. So some board members might remember the Scott Allaire subdivision on St. George Road at the corner of St. George Road and Hurricane Lane. That was a project that today Matt or I could sign off administratively for up to a fourplex. That project ran into a roadblock with a pesky little deed restriction, but in terms of its permit process, it's something that a couple of years ago had to have 2 to 3 DRB hearings and now is a one-stop administrative permit. So because of that small project exemption whereby 4 or fewer dwelling units no longer has to go through growth management, there have been 13 subdivisions that have gone through this board with pre-application review and discretionary permit review in the ag rural district. Most of these have filed final plans. A couple are in their process of filing either the discretionary permit or getting their final plans in. And depending on when this type of project would file an application, growth management could add a year of permitting. So you have to complete pre-application in a calendar year to go to growth management in March. So if someone has a pre-app in January or February, they're sitting around until the next calendar year's March, and then they're looking at late spring, summer when they're filing their discretionary permit. A lot of these projects went through pre-app and discretionary permit in a matter of months. So it significantly shortened their permitting timeline. Administratively, I think it made it a lot easier because conditions and recommendations stayed fresh not only in my mind, but in the applicant and engineer's minds to make sure that they're responding to everything that the DRB wanted to do. And at the end of the day, still designed open space subdivisions where required and met all the other provisions of the bylaw. So also in your packets, I included the 11x17 growth management table. That's where if we had public hearing items tonight, we would be writing in discretionary permit numbers for each project, or shifting them around or deleting them if a project went away. But there are a couple projects on that table that have gotten their allocation in the past. So we have Summerfield that's under construction, the annex that's under construction, the Marcotte subdivision on Caboose Lane. We're expecting that discretionary permit soon. Sally's Way, that's an interesting one up off of Mountain View Road near Trinity Church, where it got growth management allocation when affordable housing was one of the scoring components. And they amended to become an a market rate project and do the payment in lieu. So that project is under construction. We did have a small project that expired. They were trying to be extremely competitive with their growth management score. This project at 376 Mountain View Road to create a triplex behind a single family home. That score was too ambitious. They didn't file their DP. Nowadays, that project would probably be something that could either be handled administratively or would be a simple pre-app to discretionary permit process. And lastly, Windswept Meadows. This one isn't shown on that allocation table as units in the cells on the table, but it is allocated through Chapter 11. Inclusionary zoning, so we do have a couple projects that are moving through that process. And 2 have been completed, so we have the apartment building in Finney Crossing. That's also the second form-based code building ever constructed. And then we have projects that completed pre-app but are expecting a discretionary permit. So Jason Adams on Caroline Court with 9 units, and the McCullough project at 88 Mountain View Road with 32 units. We're expecting discretionary permits for those probably this year. And then lastly, again, that one project that did go through the amendment process to become a market rate project and do the payment in lieu. So that's a quick and dirty summary of growth management as it stands today, with inclusionary zoning, the Glazer project with its special allocation schedule, and then all of the small projects that have are going through the small project exemption route.
Thanks, Emily. Anybody have questions for Emily on that? Sure, we'll have questions for you if we have some growth management next year.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good question, the speculation. I think it's highly likely that we won't have any growth management next year. The ag rural zoning district is, pretty challenging to develop. And we have some other inflection points in our bylaw, like when things go from a shared private driveway to a street specification that really stratify projects. For example, the Marcotte project is only able to be on a shared private driveway because they're at a reduced density. So you have to have a really, really huge land holding to have more than 5 units on a shared private driveway in the ag rural zoning district. So a long way of saying that the driveway standard in ag rural really tampers down how many units can be in a project. It's also the remaining parcels that haven't been subdivided in that district tend to have challenging water and wastewater treatment locations, tend to be steep and have other constraints where even though the theoretical density might be quite high, functionally siting a home site is tricky, or a home site that would be marketable is tricky. In the residential zoning district, we're more and more likely to see these small infill projects, so duplexes or triplexes, smaller infill projects that are fewer than 10 units. There's only one large landholding parcel left in this district to go through a more traditional subdivision, and that one's still probably many ways from those landowners, formally engaging in the permit process. It's the Martell property between Summerfield and Glazer, and that parcel, that area of town also has some significant wetlands. And then the growth center, the majority of those buildings are going to be in the form-based code district where it's an administrative review, and the annex is plugging and chugging on its allocation. It's 276 dwelling units. Cottonwood Crossing in the growth center was one that went through the growth management process, now is also in form-based code, so any new buildings that's near Allen's Pools and Spas and Toscano's, that area of town, those buildings would be form-based code administrative. So I do think it's likely that because of all of the amendments over the year, it's unlikely that we'll have a growth management hearing next year. That being said, the number of homes that are being permitted is well within what's anticipated, well within what the town is able to serve in terms of sewer capacity, that kind of thing.
Okay. That's great. Anything else before we move on from that agenda item? You think is there anything that we're losing out on with this new process versus when people were incentivized to go through growth management?
Well, one of the things about the way growth management evolved over the years was it started off because the town was sued by a developer for not giving that developer allocation to move forward with their project, because the town didn't own enough capacity at the time to fully support the project. And part of that court case was the court said to the town, you need to come up with some kind of system for giving this allocation out. And in fact, state law pretty much requires that you have some kind of allocation system now as well. And so initially the system was growth management, and it was really just, we can only support so many houses a year. And it was very closely tied to the town sewer allocation ordinance. Over the years, there were reasons other than wastewater that the town wanted to limit residential growth, primarily demand on the school system, which was being operated by the town at the time, funded by the town at the time. This is all, pre-Act 60. And then, as you start to operate that system, the Select Board, Planning Commission, and others say, well, as long as we have something that's limited, that people want more of it than we have to give out, we can incentivize them to do things that our zoning doesn't outright require. And so until a couple of years ago, and a little bit now, even today, that was how the town would get affordable housing, because it was a way to up your growth management score. Same thing with building paths and trails, and a bunch of the other things that growth management incentivized. And as the system became more and more onerous to operate, and we had things like the example of a Creek's Edge, a 35-unit development coming back to rearrange its growth management allocation 3, 4, 5 times, just to basically keep building what amounted to 6 or 7 houses a year. Because of that system. Or in the financial crisis of 2008, we literally had expiring allocation and people with platted lots that no longer carried a right to build, which I don't even know if you can really do that to somebody, but growth management did. So the system just became more and more complex, more and more burdensome. Ken Beliveau and I started talking to the Planning Commission and saying, well, let's look at how you could get the good things that growth management is bringing you, the things that people are putting in their subdivisions in order to be competitive. Many of these can, in one shape or form or another, be required by zoning. And at the time, I'd say the Planning Commission was about 75% convinced of that, and the Select Board was about 49% convinced of that. So growth management as a system stayed when we took a big look at it in 2016, 2017. Since then, as Emily went over, we've had state law changes. We've become more sophisticated in what our zoning requires. So we have tools like the official map that say where we want roads, paths, trails, and bike lanes to go. We have inclusionary zoning that just basically outright says, include an affordable component in your project or pay some money into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So we've greatly reduced those things that we get because of growth management and codified most of them. And I don't know if you can think, Emily, of an example of one we really haven't yet.
Designed for context, the really squishy
The one
ones that don't
everybody
really
always got
mean
full
anything.
points for. Energy efficiency was
Energy
another one.
efficiency.
It was impossible to even keep up with the changing state standards. So we ended up incentivizing a standard that was 5 years out of date because the bylaw wasn't amended. So I think if the system works well, most of your large-scale developers will take the inclusionary path. We tried to create that as something people would actually use. It's not intended to, tank projects or make them untenable. It's because if you're not building any housing, you're definitely not building affordable housing. We have exemptions for small projects, which never made sense. And having somebody come in, I had an agricultural, rural, residential landowner who we would have the same conversation every year for 6 years. When can I do my project? I'm sorry, there's a project ahead of you in line. They took all the marbles. It's not even worth you filing this year. And we had that conversation year after year after year. And I really don't think his lot with one house on it that became 3 lots with 3 houses on it was ever going to create a burden on the town. If there were hundreds and hundreds of projects like that happening, maybe, but his was one of a handful. And that had a real impact on that applicant's life in terms of their financial planning, their retirement planning. For a project that was 110% compliant with the town zoning. And ultimately resulted in the town being conveyed a trail access easement, resulted in open space being protected because it was in the ag rural district, et cetera, et cetera. So I won't inject too much opinion about the growth management system into this conversation, but I think collectively the town has found better ways to get the things that the comprehensive plan says the town should be getting when new development happens. And the rate of growth is really a different significance to the town when, it's no longer funding and operating a school system. That's happening statewide. So the fiscal impact is really different.
Yeah.
And the demographics are not new development is not bringing new kids into the school district.
Got it.
The
That's
other
great
interesting
context.
thing about growth management is it's not a one-to-one allocation in this year, house comes online in that fiscal year. So you look at that table, it has allocation across the 10 future fiscal years. But that home isn't gonna come online in that fiscal year per se. So if the goal is under that old system, like 80 dwelling units per year, we'll just then limit the number of administrative permits. So it wasn't creating that intended one-to-one effect, because projects, you would get your allocation, you would still have several more years of permitting. Developers would often delay when they would start construction until they had a certain amount of allocation and a guarantee on their project. So it created a lag. And then when a construction project starts, everybody around it just wants it done as quickly as possible, and growth management kind of languished it out for further years. So it wasn't that true one-to-one of 80 dwelling units coming online per year. And we also publish a growth report for the select board, and it really fluctuates because you could have 1 year where one apartment building with 60 dwelling units gets permitted, and it takes a couple years for that to construct. Whereas you might have another year where you only get a handful of single-family home permits. So there's a lot of variability in how many homes are permitted year and how many homes, when I say come online, means they're occupied per year, and it has no relation to the growth management system.
Great. Any questions, guys? Anybody?
No.
Solid explanations. Thank you, guys.
Sure.
Well, I think with that, we can probably close this staff training. Thank you. And we will just move on to other business. Does anyone have any other business, board, to address? In that case, is there a motion to approve the minutes from, I believe it was February 24th? Yep, February 24th. Was there an edit?
Yes, the recommended edit to, Colin, which one, was that recommendation 1B, I think?
1B.
Yeah.
Yeah, referring to Lot 2 instead of Lot 1 in regards to the setbacks.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and make that edit. Is there a motion to approve with that edit?
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Scott. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Motion passes. With that, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting of March 24th?
So moved.
Thank you, Scott. That's it, guys. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for sticking with us tonight here. Hopefully, that was entertaining.